I did not fear death. That is the first truth I must speak to you. Here in the quiet beyond the world I once ruled, death was never my enemy. I met it long before the Ides of March, in the cries of soldiers, in the dust of battle, in Rome's endless hunger for power. No, death was familiar. What I feared was being forgotten. So listen now in this stillness as I open the sealed chambers of my memory, not as a conqueror, not as a statesman, not as the marble statue Rome raised in my image, but as a man, a soul carved by ambition, haunted by omens, driven by a vision of Rome that few ever understood. They say I reached too high, that I dreamt beyond my station, that I walked among the gods before earning my place beside them. Perhaps they are right, but tonight I will tell you the truth. How a boy from a fading noble house rose to command legions, reshape the republic, and walk knowingly into betrayal. How love, fear, destiny, and pride shaped every step. How Rome became both my masterpiece and my undoing. If you wish to sleep, let my voice be the tide that carries you. If you wish to dream, let my memories be the path. And if you seek to understand how an ordinary man became a legend, then come with me into the shadows of my past. For I am Gaius Julius Caesar, and this is my confession. Part 1. A Roman Dawn. I was born on a warm summer morning in the heart of Rome. The first light of dawn crept over the city's tiled rooftops and marble temples, casting golden rays into the cramped streets of the Subura district, where my family lived. In that quiet hour before the market stirred and the clatter of wagons began, my mother Aurelia held me close by the glow of a small oil lamp. She later told me that I entered this world with a loud, vigorous cry, as if announcing myself to Rome from my very first breath. My family, the Iuli, was ancient and proud, though by the time of my birth our fortunes had faded. We traced our lineage to the goddess Venus through her son Aeneas, and this illustrious heritage was a source of quiet pride in our household. My father, also named Gaius Julius Caesar, would sometimes lift me onto his knee in the evenings and remind me of this legacy. "Never forget, my son," he would say softly, "you come from the blood of gods and kings. Carry yourself with dignity." I did not fully grasp those words as a child, but I felt their importance. I would repeat the names of our ancestors like a nursery rhyme. Aeneas, was all the Iuli, tasting the promise that my father imagined for me. Despite our noble blood, we lived modestly. Our home was a tall insula apartment in the Subura, a neighborhood of craftsmen, merchants, and noisy crowds. By day I peered from our balcony at the lively street below, merchants pushing carts of olives and fish, ox-drawn wagons trundling by with loads of grain, children darting between stalls with shrieks of laughter. The air was thick with the smell of baked bread from a nearby oven, and the pungent tang of spices from market stalls. The Subura was not the polished world of senators on the Palatine Hill. It was cramped and alive, a jumble of languages and faces from every corner of the republic. And yet, in the evenings, a peace would settle over our quarter. As dusk painted the stucco walls a soft orange, I would sit by the window while my mother gently combed my hair. Together we watched lamps being lit one by one along the lane. A distant flute might play a plaintive tune in some tavern, and the day's final cries of vendors slowly died away. In those moments, safe under Aurelia's watchful gaze, I felt utterly at peace, blissfully unaware of the storms that would one day loom over us. Aurelia was the anchor of my childhood. Renowned for her intelligence and virtue, she exemplified the ideal Roman matron. From her I learned discipline, and honor. Each morning she oversaw my lessons in reading and recitation, ensuring I practiced my Latin and Greek by reciting poetry and histories aloud. If my posture slumped or my attention wavered, a single stern glance from her would bring me back to focus. Yet she could be gentle as well. When I excelled, she might allow a small, proud smile and reward me with a touch on the cheek. At her knee, I first heard the tales of our Republic's heroes. She told me of brave Horatius at the bridge, of Cincinnatus leaving his plow to save Rome, and of our own ancestors who served the Republic with loyalty. One name she spoke with special reverence was Gaius Marius, my great-uncle by marriage and a giant of our age. Uncle Marius had been a 7-time consul and a general celebrated for defeating barbarian hordes. To me, as a young boy, he was like a living legend. I remember him visiting our home when I was perhaps 5 years old, stooping slightly to pass through our doorway, his presence filling the room. He lifted me up in his arms, and I recall the bristling texture of his gray beard against my cheek as he laughed. "Little Caesar," he said warmly, "perhaps one day you'll hold a command of your own." At the time, I only knew the kindness in his eyes and the sense of strength he carried. But that memory stayed with me, a quiet spark in my young heart, long after he put me down. As I grew into boyhood, Rome itself was changing around me. Political tempests gathered beyond the horizon of my childhood innocence. Factions in the Senate struggled for power, and two mighty figures, Marius and his former lieutenant Lucius Cornelius Sulla, became locked in a deadly rivalry. I was about 10 years old when I first sensed the undercurrents of danger. At night, I sometimes awoke to the sound of my parents speaking in hushed, urgent whispers in the next room. I caught snippets of words: exile, bloodshed, Sulla's return. By the time I was a young teenager, those whispers had become hard reality. Marius, my great-uncle, and his allies held power briefly, and then Sulla marched on Rome with grim determination. The city I loved became a place of fear. I remember a day like a scene from a feverish dream. The sky was a brilliant Roman blue, and I was studying my rhetoric exercises when suddenly shouts echoed from the streets. My tutor's face went white as he listened at the window. "Come, young master, we must go home, now," he urged, hastily gathering the scrolls. Outside, throngs of panicked citizens jostled each other. Word spread that Sulla's armies had entered the city. Smoke curled up from distant fires. I clung to my tutor's hand as we made our way through the screaming and running crowds. When I reached home, my mother embraced me tightly, relief flooding her eyes. That night, I truly understood fear for the first time. We bolted our doors and extinguished our lamps, huddling together in the dark, unsure what the dawn would bring. Sulla declared himself dictator and unleashed a wave of terror known as the proscriptions. Each day, lists of names were posted in the forum, those whom Sulla condemned to death and whose properties were seized. I saw men's lives erased by a stroke of the pen. Friends of my father disappeared overnight. Once I passed through the forum at midday and saw the corpse of a senator, a former acquaintance of my family, displayed cruelly as a warning. I was barely 14, and the sight froze my blood. The air in Rome felt heavy with dread and the metallic scent of violence. Neighbors avoided eye contact in the streets, uncertain who would vanish next. My own father, while not a radical, had been allied by family loyalty to Marius's faction. It was enough to put us all in jeopardy. Every knock at our door made my heart race. Every strange face in the street could be a spy or assassin. In the midst of this terror, my family tried to maintain a facade of normal life. Before Sulla seized power, my father had arranged for me, still just a boy, to marry Cornelia, the teenage daughter of Lucius Cinna, one of Marius's dearest allies. The marriage was politically advantageous and tied our fortunes to Cinna's, but it turned into a genuine bond of affection between Cornelia and me. She was a gentle girl with wise eyes, and in our uncertain world we found solace in each other's company. We married when I was about 17. I felt both the weight of adult responsibility and the lightness of young love on our simple wedding day. Cornelia's presence was a comfort amid the chaos. Together we dreamed quietly of a time when peace might return. That hope dimmed when Sulla's edicts struck directly at us. The dictator demanded that I divorce Cornelia to sever my connection to Cinna's family. Compliance would signal my loyalty to Sulla's new order, but it would also mean dishonor and heartbreak. I can still see the firelight playing on the tears in Cornelia's eyes the night we heard of Sulla's demand. Outside, rain pelted the roof as a storm raged. Inside our modest chambers, a storm of another kind churned in my soul. I was barely 18, my life scarcely begun, yet fate forced this cruel choice upon me. To save myself, I was expected to cast aside the woman I had grown to love and the mother of my child, merely to appease a tyrant's pen. I remember rising from my seat, crossing the room to where Cornelia stood trembling. Gently, I took her hands in mine. My voice was low but firm as I vowed that I would never abandon her, no matter what decree came from a tyrant's whim. If I yielded now, I realized I would betray not only my beloved wife but also my own honor. Defying Sulla meant courting death. We soon learned that my refusal had earned the dictator's fury. My name was whispered to be on the next list of the proscribed. We had to flee. Late one night, under a moonless sky, I quietly gathered Cornelia and a few essentials. My mother Aurelia embraced me fiercely before we slipped away. She pressed a small purse of coins into my hand and bade me go with the protection of the gods. In her eyes I saw devastation and unwavering resolve all at once. "Go, my son," she whispered, fighting to keep her voice steady. "Survive this and live proudly. We will manage until you return." With a final tearful glance at my mother and at the sleeping city beyond, I turned and vanished into the darkness. Guided by a loyal family servant, Cornelia and I made our way through Rome's silent back streets. My heart pounded with each step, expecting at any moment to hear the shout of soldiers closing in. But the city slept, oblivious to our small drama. Only the distant hoot of an owl and our soft footfalls accompanied us as we passed under the ancient arches of a city gate and into the open countryside beyond. When dawn's first light touched the sky behind us, I paused on a hilltop to look back at Rome. The silhouette of the Capitol and the temples were etched dark against the pink horizon. My chest tightened with a mix of sorrow and determination. I whispered a prayer to Jupiter for my family's safety and for strength to fulfill whatever destiny awaited me. At that moment I felt both very young and very old. Everything I had known was behind me, yet ahead lay an unknown road. I took Cornelia's hand as we continued on, each step carrying me farther from the boy I had been and closer to the man I would become. In the cool morning air, with the dew on the grass and the promise of sunrise before us, I made a silent vow. I would return to Rome one day on my own terms, and I would not live my life in fear, but in pursuit of a fate that even Sulla's sword could not extinguish. Part 2. Trials of Youth. Leaving Rome behind under a cloud of danger, I journeyed into an uncertain exile. With Cornelia at my side and a few loyal companions, I crossed the sea to the east, seeking refuge under foreign skies. In the provinces of Asia Minor, I found a world both strange and wondrous. The Aegean winds smelled of salt and wild thyme. Unfamiliar constellations glittered above me at night. Standing on the deck of the ship that bore me from Italy, I watched the outline of my homeland fade on the horizon. A pang of loss hit my heart, but alongside it rose a steely resolve. If Rome was close to me for now, I would prove my worth elsewhere and return stronger. I soon found a place among the legions garrisoned in Asia. I was barely out of boyhood earnest, angry, eager to show my mettle. Serving under the governor of Asia, I traded the toga of a noble for a soldier's simple tunic and boots. Life in camp was harsh but refreshing in its simplicity. I learned to march under a blazing sun, to sleep on hard ground beneath a canopy of stars, and to share bread and laughter with rough-handed legionaries. Out on the empire's edge, far from Rome's marble halls, I felt something awaken in me, a sense of purpose and camaraderie I had never known in the faction-ridden streets of the capital. Here, life was elemental: the next meal, the next sunrise, the weight of a sword in hand. I discovered that I loved the life of a soldier. It was in Asia that I had my first taste of battle. A local uprising on the Greek island of Mytilene forced our unit into action. On the eve of my first combat, under a bright moon that silvered the tents of our camp, I felt fear flutter in my chest. Would I prove courageous when steel clashed at dawn? At first light, we stormed the rebel stronghold, and chaos erupted around me, the crash of shields, the roar of men fighting for their lives. In the midst of the fray, I saw a Roman soldier fall, pinned under rubble and surrounded by enemy spears. Something surged within me. Without hesitation, I plunged forward through a haze of dust and arrows. I parried a thrust aimed at the fallen man and hauled him from beneath the wreckage, shielding him as we stumbled back to our lines. Moments later, our cohort overwhelmed the rebels. When the din finally ceased, I stood trembling, smeared with sweat and grime, but alive and victorious. I had faced fear and not faltered. For saving a fellow citizen's life in that battle, I was awarded the civic crown, a simple garland of oak leaves signifying valor. As the crown was placed on my head before the assembled legion, I felt an unexpected sting of tears in my eyes. I wished my father could have seen me at that moment, standing under the open sky with an honor earned by my own deeds. In that modest military decoration, I sensed a glimmer of vindication. I dedicated the achievement in my heart to my family, to Aurelia, who had instilled in me the virtues of courage, and to Rome itself, which I still longed for with every fiber of my being. Not long afterward, a momentous piece of news reached me. Sulla was dead. The tyrant whose shadow had loomed so large over my youth was gone, claimed by illness in 78 BC. I remember the day I heard of it, a sweltering afternoon in a dusty Asian outpost. A letter from my mother arrived, her usually composed script betraying excitement as she described the atmosphere in Rome now that fear had lifted. I walked out into the sunlight after reading her words and closed my eyes. The cicadas hummed in the distant olive groves, oblivious to the turmoil that had gripped our lives. I exhaled slowly, feeling years of tension flow out of my shoulders. The nightmare was over. The road home lay open at last. I returned to Rome a changed man at 22. The city I came back to was still the same maze of grand temples and teeming alleys, but I viewed it through new eyes. I had been a soldier and survivor. I had proven myself far from home. Cornelia and Aurelia welcomed me with tears of joy. Once again, I walked in the Forum under Rome's bright sun, greeting old friends and sizing up old rivals. Yet I did not return to slip quietly into obscurity. I was determined to make a name for myself. I resumed my studies of rhetoric and law, training my tongue to be as sharp as my sword. Before long, I found my stage in the courts of justice. As a young advocate, I boldly took up cases others avoided. In one of my first trials, I dared prosecute a former provincial governor notorious for corruption. My voice rang out in the basilica as I accused him of robbing the people he was meant to serve. Though he escaped conviction thanks to bribes and influence, my passion left an impression. People began to whisper that Julius Caesar, the daring youth who had defied Sulla and won a civic crown, was a speaker to be reckoned with. Ever restless to improve myself, in 75 BC I set out across the sea again, this time to study in Rhodes under a famed master of oratory. Fortune, however, had other plans. En route, my ship was intercepted by Cilician pirates. They boarded swiftly, swords flashing under the noonday sun, and I and my companions were seized. These pirates were hardened men, and they saw in me only an aristocrat to hold for ransom. They demanded 20 talents of silver for my release, a king's sum, though I knew my family and friends could raise it. With youthful audacity, I laughed at their demand and insisted they ask for 50, so they would not cheapen my name. Perplexed but willing to gain more, they agreed. Thus began a bizarre interlude in my life. 38 days as a pirate's captive on the wide Aegean Sea. Yet I refused to behave like a captive. From the start, I carried myself as if I were the guest of honor among them, not a prisoner bound for ransom. At first, my captors were bemused by my confidence, then amused by my antics. I joined in their crude games, composed little poems and read them aloud by the campfire on deck, and shushed them mockingly when I wanted to sleep, as if they were my rowdy servants. I even shushed them as though they were rowdy children, which made them howl with laughter. In time, they began to call me young Roman with a hint of respect. Often I would tease them about their fate. With a playful smile, I warned that once I was free, I would hunt them down and crucify them for their crimes. Roman justice would demand no less. They roared with laughter at such threats from the unarmed youth in their grasp. I laughed with them, but inside I was utterly sincere. In time, the ransom I had arranged was paid. The pirates put me ashore on the coast of Asia Minor, near Miletus. The moment I was released, I wasted no time fulfilling my promise. I raised a small force of local sailors and soldiers and set out in pursuit of my former captors. We found them still anchored off a deserted bit of coastline, reveling and counting their silver, thinking themselves rich and safe. We fell upon them at dawn. Completely caught off guard, they surrendered without much fight. True to my word, I meted out the punishment Roman law prescribed for piracy. I had each of those men crucified upon the beach, beneath the same sky that had witnessed their jeers. Yet, as an act of mercy, I ordered their throats cut before the nails went in, granting them a quicker death. As I stood by the surf watching justice and vengeance carried out, I felt a cold satisfaction. These were brutal men who had preyed on the innocent, and I had purged them from the seas. Still, in the silence after their cries had faded, I sensed the emptiness that violence leaves behind. The entire episode had been like a strange dream. When it was over, I offered a prayer to Neptune to wash the blood from those shores and from my soul, and I turned back toward my life's journey, more confident than ever that I was favored by fortune. By my late 20s, I had traveled far and faced many trials. Back in Rome, I steadily climbed the ladder of public office. In due course, I was elected quaestor, the first rung of high office, and was assigned to further Spain. Hispania Ulterior, the farther Spain, was a rugged land of mountains and vivid sunsets. Serving there, I encountered ancient Iberian tribes and reminders of Rome's past wars. It was in Spain that I experienced one of the great turning points of my inner life. Near the city of Gades on the Atlantic coast, I visited a venerable temple of Hercules. It was said the hero himself had marked the limits of the world there. Inside the dim, incense-laden sanctuary stood statues of the mighty, offerings from generals and kings. Among them I came upon a statue of Alexander the Great. The sight of it stopped me cold. Alexander had conquered the world by the age I was then, yet I had achieved so little in comparison. Shame and yearning flooded through me. In that hushed sanctuary, tears stung my eyes as I realized how much of my own destiny remained unfulfilled. I swore a solemn oath then and there. I would not be content with small victories. I would strive for greatness like Alexander, like Marius, like the heroes of old, or I would die trying. I left that temple with my spirit ablaze, determined to seize every opportunity the fates would grant me. By 69 BC, I returned to Rome to continue my rise. That year proved to be a crossroads of joy and sorrow. On one hand, it marked my official entry into the Senate and higher offices, tangible progress toward the power I sought. On the other hand, it brought painful loss. My beloved Aunt Julia, the matriarch who had tied our family to Marius and who had nurtured me in my youth, passed away. Not long after, Cornelia too fell ill and left this world. In the span of months, I lost two of the dearest people in my life. Grief struck me deeply. In quiet moments, I could still hear Aunt Julia's laughter or envision Cornelia's kind smile, and the emptiness they left behind seemed vast. Yet even in mourning, duty called me to honor them. I arranged public funerals befitting their stature. In the forum, I delivered eulogies for Julia and Cornelia. My voice, laden with emotion, praised Julia's noble lineage and Cornelia's gentle virtue. As was custom, images of our ancestors were displayed, and I dared to include a bust of Gaius Marius himself, the old general whom Sulla had condemned to oblivion. For a moment the crowd was stunned to see Marius's face. Then a wave of applause broke over the forum. Rome remembered its savior. In honoring Marius openly, I felt Sulla's final chains fall away. The people began to look at me as more than a grieving kinsman. They saw a potential leader unafraid to honor the past while shaping the future. As the funeral rites concluded and the crowd dispersed, I felt a new chapter opening in my life. I had endured exile, won military laurels, survived pirates, and weathered personal tragedy. My name was becoming known in every marketplace and tavern in Rome. Though I was still young, in my early 30s, I carried the scars and lessons of a lifetime. I remarried not long after to Pompeia, a woman from Sulla's own family, in a symbolic union of past enemies. It was a practical match, meant to smooth my political path. But deep in my soul, Cornelia's memory remained a warm ember I carried everywhere. With each passing season, my ambition grew alongside my sense of purpose. I wanted not just to hold office, but to leave an imprint on Rome as deep as those left by the giants before me. Late at night, in the flickering light of my study's oil lamps, I would trace maps of the Republic's borders and run my finger along the distant provinces where I had traveled. There was so much of the world yet to be brought under Rome's wing, so many reforms at home left undone, so many laurels unwon. Sometimes I felt the spirit of my father looking over my shoulder, or the ghost of Marius, or even Alexander's cold gaze challenging me anew. Each whisper of the past spurred me forward. I resolved that when opportunity came, I would seize it with both hands. Fortune, after all, favors the bold, and I intended to be bold beyond measure in the years to come. Part 3. Paths of Ambition. One of my early grand gestures came as aedile in 65 BC. I staged the most extravagant gladiatorial games and festivals Rome had ever seen. I spared no expense and indeed plunged into debt to do so, believing that dazzling the public would earn me their enduring favor. The gamble worked. The common folk cheered my name in the streets, and my popularity swelled as never before. Even as creditors knocked at my door, I felt that fortune would favor my bold investment in glory. In 63 BC, I made a daring bid for the office of Pontifex Maximus, Rome's chief priest. Though far younger than my noble opponents and heavily in debt from campaigning, I won against all expectations. This sacred honor, a lifetime post, not only elevated my stature, but also felt like a divine nod of approval on my path. Winning that sacred office was a personal triumph. I moved into the official residence of the Pontifex Maximus, humbled and elated. In my heart I thanked the gods and felt they had blessed my ascent. Amid the honors of that year came a test of principle. A notorious conspiracy to overthrow the Republic had been foiled. Many demanded the conspirators' execution. In the Senate's heated debate, I alone urged moderation, arguing that Rome should not be so swift to kill her own citizens without due process. My stance was overruled by fear and fury. The men were executed. I accepted the outcome, but it left me thoughtful and uneasy. I prayed I would remember, if ever I held ultimate power, that clemency can be a virtue, and that the rule of law must guide us even in extremity. The following year, as praetor, I occupied one of the Republic's highest judicial offices. It was then that a scandal visited my own home and tested my composure. My wife at the time, Pompeia, was hosting the secret rites of the Bona Dei, the good goddess, a solemn women-only ceremony held at our house. I, as Pontifex Maximus, had absented myself for the evening, as all men were banned. Imagine my shock when it was revealed that a brazen young Nomon, Publius Clodius, had sneaked into the gathering disguised as a woman, supposedly to pursue an illicit rendezvous with Pompeia. The news hit me like a slap. A sacred ritual violated under my roof, and my wife's name entangled in scandal, whether she was truly involved or simply an object of Clodius's daring, it hardly mattered. The city buzzed with rumors. As the mistress of the house, Pompeia was expected to be above reproach, and now her virtue, and by extension, my honor, was thrown into question in every tavern and market stall. Clodius was brought to trial for sacrilege. I offered no incriminating testimony, refusing to dignify the sordid affair with more drama. Nonetheless, the damage to my household's honor was done. I resolved to divorce Pompeia shortly thereafter. When asked why I would cast off my wife if I believed her innocent, I answered simply that Caesar's wife must be above suspicion. Those words were harsh, but I knew a leader's household must be above reproach. In truth, I felt some sadness. Pompeia had likely done no wrong. Yet power demanded difficult sacrifices. I had given up safety and ease. Now I gave up a marriage to keep my name clean. It was a cold lesson. To reach great heights, one often must harden one's heart. Soon after, duty took me far from Rome again. In 61 BC, I assumed the governorship of Farther Spain. It was a relief, in a way, to escape the city's gossip and intrigue for the vast hills of Iberia. There, among cork oak forests and rushing rivers, I found a familiar rhythm of military life. I led legions against hostile tribes in the remote northwest, quelling uprisings and capturing hill forts tucked in misty valleys. Each victory swelled my pride and filled my coffers with spoils, helping me pay down my towering debts. My soldiers even began to hail me as Imperator, victorious commander, on the field, a taste of true military glory, an affirmation that I was as much a leader in war as in politics. When my term in Spain ended in 60 BC, my successes even earned me the prospect of a triumph, a grand victory parade in Rome. But a dilemma arose. The date to declare candidacy for the consulship was fast approaching, and Roman law forbade a general seeking a triumph from entering the city. I could either enjoy the pomp of a triumph outside Rome or forego it to run for consul. I chose power over pageantry. Without hesitation, I abandoned the triumph and hurried back into the city as a private citizen to run for consul. My instincts proved correct. With the backing of my loyal veterans and the common people's favor, I campaigned with vigor. Yet I knew raw popularity might not be enough. The nobility still viewed me with suspicion. So I brokered a partnership that would reshape the Republic. Gnaeus Pompey, Magnus Pompey the Great, was Rome's most celebrated general, fresh off splendid conquests in the East, and Marcus Crassus was the wealthiest man in Rome, who had often quietly supported my rise with loans. These two were bitter rivals, but I saw that together we could control the Republic. With careful diplomacy, I persuaded Pompey and Crassus to put aside their enmity and work with me. Each of us wanted something. Pompey sought land for his veterans and approval of his eastern conquests. Crassus desired financial reforms and prestige, and I needed their support to win the consulship and a future command. By the evening's end, we struck a private pact, a union of convenience more than friendship, but effective all the same. Backed by these powerful allies, I handily won the election of 59 BC and became consul of Rome at last. In the Senate House, the conservative faction fought bitterly to thwart my every proposal. My co-consul Bibulus vetoed meetings and even declared that the gods sent bad omens, all to stop my agrarian reforms and other measures. Seeing the Senate in deadlock, I decided to appeal directly to the people. I addressed a massive assembly of citizens in the forum, urging them to support my law granting land to the poor and to Pompey's veterans. They cheered me on. When Bibulus tried to intervene by declaring ill omens to stop the vote, the crowd drove him off. The law passed amidst the tumult. It was not politics at its prettiest, I admit. I felt a twinge of unease at the chaos, but the will of the people had been carried out. After that humiliation, Bibulus effectively gave up, staying home and declaring every day a bad omen day, which the public simply ignored. In the end, much was achieved. Poor citizens and veterans received land. Pompey's eastern arrangements were ratified, and Crassus's clients in the tax sector got relief. My allies were satisfied. In return, they supported the prize I sought, a grand military command where I could truly make my mark. By the end of my consulship, through deft politicking, I obtained an extraordinary assignment, the governorship of Cisalpine Gaul, Transalpine Gaul, and Illyricum for 5 years, with command of 4 legions. It was unprecedented for a consul to secure such a grand province and army immediately after his term. I suspect even the Senate moderates who approved it did not foresee what it would lead to. They likely thought I would busy myself fighting ragtag tribes and be safely away from Rome. On the last day of December 59 BC, I rode home in my official toga for the final time as consul. I felt a weight lift from my shoulders. The intense year was over, but a new excitement kindled within. Ahead of me lay Gaul, a vast land of forests and fierce tribes, a theater ripe for glory and conquest. That night I hosted a small gathering at my home. Pompey was there, and he beamed with pride as he chatted with my daughter Julia, now his wife, for I had given her hand to him during my consulship to bind our alliance and family ties. Julia was radiant, and seeing her happiness eased my heart. She was the bridge between two men who held the world in their hands. Also present was Calpurnia, whom I had married as my new wife, a gentle and wise young woman who had been a quiet support through the year's storms. Surrounded by friends and family, I savored a cup of wine and reflected on how far I had come. From a fugitive scrambling to survive, I had risen to the pinnacle of Roman office. But I sensed this was only the beginning. The Republic was changing. I could feel it like the distant tremor of an earthquake underfoot. I intended to guide that change, to shape it to the benefit of Rome and perhaps to my own immortal fame. Within weeks I said farewell to the city of my birth and set out northward to assume command in Gaul. I recall the morning I departed. I stood at the northern gate of Rome at first light, dressed in my general's cloak and boots. A winter chill hung in the air, and a thin mist clung to the fields beyond the city. My breath billowed white as I took one last look at Rome's rooftops and distant 7 hills. In my chest I felt a familiar flutter akin to what I felt long ago on the eve of my first battle. It was the thrill of the unknown. Ahead lay a new frontier, new battles to win, a chance to carve my name alongside the likes of Alexander and Marius. Behind me, the city still slept, unaware of how our fortunes would intertwine in the coming years. I mounted my horse and turned toward the north. With a final silent vow to Jupiter and Mars to favor my endeavors, I spurred my steed onward. The road to Gaul stretched before me under the dim sunrise, and with it, the next chapter of my life unfurled, one of conquest, challenge, and destiny calling me beyond the horizon. Part 4. Thunder in Gaul. Gaul greeted me with emerald forests and rolling plains that stretched beyond the horizon. This vast land, divided among fierce tribes, was both beautiful and wild, a world away from the marble temples of Rome. As I led my legions northward in 58 BC, I often rode ahead at dawn, the mist rising from the rivers and dew soaking the leather of my boots. In those quiet moments I felt a great anticipation. Here, in these untamed lands, I would test myself as a commander on a scale I had never before known. The soldiers marching behind me were veterans hardened by prior wars, but even they cast curious, wary eyes at the dense woods and distant hill forts of Gaul. We all sensed the challenges to come, like the charge in the air before a storm. The storm was not long in coming. Early in my campaign, I confronted a great migration of the Helvetii tribe, tens of thousands strong, who were crossing through our allies' lands. We met in battle near Bibracte. It was a fierce and costly fight, the roar of tens of thousands of warriors shaking the ground, but by dusk, Roman discipline prevailed. The Helvetii, battered and exhausted, conceded defeat and agreed to return to their homeland rather than disturb the peace of Gaul. Our first major victory in Gaul was won. As I surveyed the battlefield at twilight, smoke hanging in the cool air, I silently honored the fallen on both sides and steeled myself for the challenges yet to come. No sooner was that dust settled than a new menace emerged. Ariovistus, a Germanic king beyond the Rhine, had invaded Gaul and oppressed its tribes. I first attempted diplomacy, but Ariovistus was dismissive and scorned any compromise. Thus we marched to meet him in battle. His German warriors charged with terrifying fury, nearly breaking our lines at one point. But my veteran legions held fast. In a hard-fought struggle, we turned the tide and routed Ariovistus's forces. He himself fled across the Rhine in defeat, and the threat of his dominion over Gaul was vanquished. After the victory, I rode to the river bank and watched the swift waters flow east, grateful that no foreign king from beyond that river would harry Gaul while Rome stood guard. In the campaigns of the following year, 57 BC, I pushed further into Gaul. The various tribes, seeing my early victories, were uneasy and some chose alliance, while others bristled and united against us. A confederation of Belgic tribes in the north rose up, mustering one of the largest armies anyone had seen. These Belgi were said to be the bravest of Gauls, and they proved it. We met them near the banks of the Sabes River. That day, the fighting was ferocious and nearly disastrous for us. The Belgi, especially the tribe called the Nervi, caught us off guard during the very act of pitching camp. Many legionaries were still digging trenches and not in battle formation when waves of warriors with wild hair and fierce eyes burst from the tree line, screaming war cries to their gods. For a heartbeat, panic flickered among some of our troops. I myself was arranging the fortifications when the alarm was raised. Reacting instantly, I snatched up a shield and rushed to the front lines. There, I saw my Roman soldiers struggling to form ranks, some falling back under the furious assault. Amid the chaos, I found a vantage on a slight rise and bellowed for the standard of the 10th Legion. Seeing their general in the fray, the men rallied. Centurions barked orders, lines reformed, and the legions began to push back steadily. The Nervi fought with near supernatural courage. Even encircled, they refused to flee. It became a slog of shield against sword, thrust, and parry, until at last the weight of Roman discipline ground them down. By day's end, the Nervi force was virtually annihilated. Out of thousands, only a few hundred survived. I was moved by their valor, even in a defeat. We buried the dead with respect and spared the remaining Nervi, treating them with mercy. Valor such as theirs deserved recognition, and I hoped our clemency would sow peace as much as our victory did. By this point, word of our exploits was echoing across the known world. My dispatches to the Senate, written plainly and without boast, told of new tribes subdued and alliances forged. In Rome, I was told, people thronged the streets to hear the latest news from Gaul read aloud, and my name was on every tongue. Despite being far from the capital, I could sense my growing renown, like a distant fire whose warmth I could feel even in the chill forests of the north. Each winter, when campaigning paused, I returned to the calmer towns of Cisalpine Gaul, the province just north of Italy, to govern and to stay in touch with Roman politics. With spring's arrival, I marched north again. In 56 and 55 BC, the campaigns took me to the edges of the world. In 55 BC, to deter further German forays, I undertook a bold feat. My engineers built a massive wooden bridge across the Rhine. I led our legions over into the territory of the Germanic tribes for a brief show of force. Satisfied that I had demonstrated Rome's reach and put the tribes on notice, I withdrew back into Gaul and had the bridge dismantled behind us. That done, my eyes turned to the west, across the sea. In 55 and 54 BC, I mounted 2 expeditions to the mysterious island of Britannia, the first Roman general to do so. We set sail in flat-bottomed boats and landed on wind-swept shores beneath tall white cliffs, encountering astonished Briton warriors in chariots. The first incursion was brief, thwarted by fierce storms and unfamiliar terrain. The following summer I returned with larger forces, marched inland through green, rolling countrysides, and fought several skirmishes with the tribal fighters. Their land was like a world out of legend, shrouded in mist and ancient oaks. Though we did not stay long enough to subdue Britain completely, I compelled several chieftains to offer submission and hostages, extending Rome's influence beyond the very edge of the known world. Standing on that far shore after the negotiations, watching the strange ocean tides pull at the pebbled beach, I felt a deep awe. We had carried Rome's banner to lands that once only existed in travelers' tales. Few accomplishments in my life equaled the quiet pride of that moment. By the end of 54 BC, Gaul was largely pacified on the surface. I had marched my legions victorious from the Rhine to the ocean. We had defeated every major force that stood against us. Around our winter hearths, my officers and men spoke with pride of how far we had come. Many of the legionaries, grizzled now and confident, boasted that no army on earth could stand against the might of Rome under Caesar. I will confess I too felt a great sense of accomplishment. These years in Gaul had transformed me from a politician general into a true conqueror. Yet I did not allow myself to grow complacent. Much work remained to secure Gaul fully under Rome's dominion, and I was determined to see it through. It was during that winter, as we made our quarters in a Gallic town with snow blanketing the roofs, that a piece of news reached me which pierced my heart. A messenger arrived from Rome bringing letters. From those letters fell a lock of hair and a trembling script telling me that my beloved daughter Julia had died in childbirth. I sat down heavily upon a stool by the hearth as the words swam before my eyes. Julia, my dear girl with her mother's smile, was gone. She had been the brightest link between myself and Pompey, having married him out of love and alliance. The child she bore, my grandchild, had perished as well. In that moment, the warmth of the fire could not touch the chill that fell over me. I shut my eyes and could see Julia as a little girl, running through our garden in a white tunic, laughing as she chased a butterfly. I thought of Pompey, who I knew adored her deeply, and my chest ached imagining his grief as well. Outside my quarters, the din of soldiers singing around their campfires suddenly felt distant and hollow. Unable to sit still, I wandered outside my quarters into the crisp winter night. The stars were sharp and cold above, and the faint sound of soldiers' songs by distant campfires felt hollow to my ears. Under that silent sky in a foreign land, I finally allowed myself to weep and mourn. I whispered a prayer for Julia's gentle soul, commending her spirit to the gods and to her ancestors' arms. The news of her passing cast a shadow over that winter. It was a sorrow I carried quietly, even as I had to maintain my resolve among the troops. But I understood something deeply. No triumph in the field could ever bring back what I loved. I resolved then to see this campaign through to its end and return to Rome when I could, to ensure that such sacrifices, personal and public, had meaning. Little did I know, even greater trials were on the horizon, both for Gaul and for the fate of my beloved republic. Part 5. The Gaul Rebellion. The year 52 BC arrived with a chill and foreboding unlike any I had felt in Gaul before. After years of steady conquest, the land itself seemed to convulse in one great effort to expel us. Across the frozen rivers and snow-cloaked forests, tribes that had been humbled or quiet now rose up in sudden fury. In the depths of winter, as I oversaw routine administration in a Gallic town, word came rider after rider. Rebellion. First one tribe, then another, then many at once. It was as if a spark had landed in dry tinder. The flames of revolt spread in every direction. At the center of this storm was a young Arvernian chieftain named Vercingetorix. I remembered him from years before, a tall, intense man with fiery eyes, known for his skill and ambition. Now he had forged a confederation of Gaul's tribes, uniting them with a promise to reclaim their freedom. They hailed him as King of all Gaul, a title no one had worn before. In him I sensed an adversary unlike any I'd faced here, cunning, courageous, and fighting for the very soul of his homeland. The early phase of the revolt was harrowing. Our forces were scattered in winter quarters throughout the region, and my legions were not concentrated as they would be in campaign season. Vercingetorix moved swiftly, attacking outposts and rallying new warriors from every village and hill fort with passionate appeals to pride and liberty. It was a brilliant strategy. He sought to stretch us thin and cut off our supply lines. I wasted no time. Though blizzards choked the mountain passes, I gathered whatever detachments I could and rode out to relieve besieged allies. The cold was knife-sharp. More than once we marched through snow so deep it numbed the legs of men and horses alike. My soldiers, veterans of many summers, had never before campaigned in such bitter weather, yet they followed me with grim resolve. I remember nights when we huddled around sparse fires, cloaks pulled tight, our breath turning to frost as we planned the next day's march. The usual songs and laughter of the camps were subdued. Every man understood the peril. For the first time, Rome's dominance in Gaul was truly at risk. Vercingetorix proved a wily opponent. He avoided pitched battles unless on ground of his choosing. Instead, he waged war of attrition, scorched earth, ambushes, cutting off forage. I responded in kind, pushing my troops hard to outmaneuver him. One of the early confrontations came at the stronghold of Gergovia in the land of the Arverni, Vercingetorix's own people. Gergovia perched atop steep slopes, ringed by stout walls and a fierce garrison. To assault it would be perilous. To leave it untaken would be a humiliation and a rallying point for the Gauls. I decided to attack, confident in Roman tenacity. In hindsight, it was one of the few decisions I would come to deeply regret. By summer, Vercingetorix made a stand at the stronghold of Gergovia, high on a steep hill. Determined not to leave this challenge unanswered, I attempted an assault on that formidable position. It was a terrible mistake. The Gauls used the high ground to their advantage. In a chaotic fight on the slopes, my legions suffered a stinging defeat. We were driven back with heavy losses and forced to retreat. The victory at Gergovia emboldened the rebellion further and shook our aura of invincibility. For me, it was a bitter lesson in humility, a rare and painful setback. With Gergovia lost, many wavering tribes fully committed to Vercingetorix's rebellion. Gaul was ablaze, but failure sharpened my resolve like steel on a whetstone. I regrouped my forces, calling in reinforcements and Germanic cavalry from across the Rhine. Vercingetorix, emboldened, sought to tighten his grip by attacking my supply lines. Sensing his confidence, I planned a bold trap and forced him into a corner. By late summer of 52 BC, events led us to a final confrontation at a fortified town called Alicia, belonging to the Mandubi tribe. There, on a broad plateau encircled by rivers and hills, Vercingetorix and his army took refuge behind stout timber walls, along with thousands of civilians. I arrived at Alicia, determined to finish this war once and for all. The situation was dramatic. I had perhaps 50,000 legionaries. Vercingetorix had a similar number inside the walls. Worse for us, he had sent riders to summon a huge relief army of Gauls from all directions, intending to catch us between the fort and the oncoming hordes. Retreat was not an option. I would not allow another Gurge. So I committed to a siege unlike any in history. If Alicia would not yield, we would contain it and simultaneously brace for an attack from without. My engineers and legionaries labored day and night digging trenches, erecting palisades and building a ring of fortifications encircling Alicia, a wall to pen the Gauls inside. Then, anticipating the relief forces, we built a second ring of defenses facing outward. It was a monstrous undertaking. Double walls of entrenchment stretching for many miles, studded with towers, ditches, stakes, and traps. From the heights, the Gauls must have watched in amazement as our earthworks grew day by day, slowly strangling them in. When the relief army finally arrived, they came in their tens of thousands, a vast sea of warriors eager to crush us against the fortress. Thus began a battle on two fronts, truly like none other. By night, signal fires flared from the distant hills as the Gaulish reinforcements signaled to those besieged within Alesia. Their coordinated assaults were tremendous. Imagine our thin lines spread around a huge circle. On one side, Vercingetorix's forces would sally out with fury, trying to break through our inner wall. At the same time, the relief army would hurl itself against our outer defenses, screaming war cries into the night. More than once, the situation hung by a thread. At one point, part of the outer wall was overrun by sheer weight of the assault. I raced to the threatened sector with my reserves. In the flickering torchlight under a moonless sky, Romans and Gauls fought hand-to-hand atop ramparts, stumbling over sharpened stakes and the fallen. I found myself in the thick of combat, sword drawn. The horn blasts of my officers and my own shouts somehow cut through the chaos. Bit by bit, we pushed them back into the dark. All through that long night of battle, I moved wherever the danger was greatest, urging my men to hold. Not a single cohort broke faith. By dawn, the exhausted relief warriors drew off, having failed to break our lines. On the third day, they made one last massive attempt at several points at once. It was their all-or-nothing effort. The pressure was immense. Our lines buckled in places. I called on every reserve, every last pair of hands to reinforce the defenses. Finally, in the afternoon, as the sun cast long shadows over the plain, I watched the Gaulish tide ebb. Their courage was undiminished, but they simply could not penetrate our fortifications. Seeing their chance slip away, the various chieftains in the relief force began to order retreat. A great cry went up from their host, not of victory but of despair. From the rampart on which I stood, I could see their banners withdrawing, little by little, then all at once in a rout. The army, coming to save Alesia, dissolved into the hills and forests beyond. The next morning, silence hung over the field. Inside Alesia, Vercingetorix and his followers understood the end had come. Their food was gone, their allies scattered. I arranged a meeting, curious to finally encounter my foe face to face. Not long after, I managed to corner Vercingetorix in a fortified town called Elisi. It was there that the fate of Gaul would be decided. Anticipating a massive Gallic relief force, I ordered an unprecedented strategy. We built 2 rings of fortifications around Alesia, one facing inward to contain Vercingetorix's army, and another facing outward to repel his allies. The siege that followed was among the most intense and extraordinary in history. For days we fought off ferocious attacks from both inside and outside our lines. At the most critical moments I rode along the ramparts wherever the danger flared, urging my men to hold fast. The earth shook with the violence of the onslaughts. but the lines held. When the relief armies finally broke and scattered, the Gauls within Alesia lost all hope. Vercingetorix, seeing the end at hand, rode out of the fortress and surrendered himself into my mercy. In the aftermath, I declared a general amnesty to heal the wounds of war. Over the following year, I pardoned the remaining chieftains who laid down arms and worked to bring stability to the new province. Gaul was finally at peace under Rome's authority. My veterans and I knew we had achieved something monumental. We had fought for years through hardship and victory, and now an entire land was firmly in Rome's embrace. Yet even as Gaul was secured, I felt the winds of uncertainty blowing from the direction of home. News from Rome had grown increasingly troubling. The political alliance that had bolstered me was crumbling. My great friend and ally Crassus was dead, killed disastrously in the eastern deserts against the Parthians. My dear Julia was gone, removing the familial bond between Pompey and me. In Rome, factions were aligning and whispering that Caesar's power had grown too vast. I had been away for years, winning unmatched glory, and that itself bred envy and fear in some hearts. Pompey Magnus, once like a brother to me, had remained in Rome and, after Julia's death, drifted under the influence of our old opponents in the Senate. He even married the daughter of a staunch optimate. Reports hinted that Pompey had slowly turned from an ally into something colder, if not an outright rival, then at least a man no longer inclined to defend my interests in the halls of power. I was not blind to the gathering clouds. During the winter of 50 BC, as I based myself in the bordered town of Ravenna, just south of the Alps, I found myself in as many negotiations by letter and messenger as I had fought battles. My term in Gaul was ending, and by Roman law I would have to relinquish command and return to Rome as a private citizen if I did not secure another office. That prospect troubled me greatly. I had made many enemies who would eagerly drag me to court, or worse, the moment I lost the immunity of command. I requested to stand for the consulship of 48 BC in absentia, as was customarily allowed, so that I could transition from proconsul to consul without a gap. But the Senate, spurred by Pompey and Cato, obstinately refused. They delivered an ultimatum: disband your army and return to Rome, or be declared a traitor. It was a knife pressed against my throat. Night after night in Ravenna, I paced and pondered by lamplight. I wrote letters to the Senate professing my willingness to lay down arms if Pompey would do the same with his armies in Italy, trying to find a path of compromise. Most of those letters went unanswered or were met with curt rejections. I appealed to Pompey as well, an appeal to the friendship and mutual respect we once shared. His replies were polite but distant. He had made his choice to side with the Senate's decree. I could scarcely recognize the man who had been my son-in-law and partner in governance. Perhaps he barely recognized me after my long years in Gaul and the fame I had won. As the year 49 BC dawned, word arrived that the Senate, at Pompey's urging, had declared I must disarm by a set date or be branded an enemy of the state. Some of my staunchest allies in Rome fled the city to join me, risking their lives to stand by my side. Among them was Mark Antony, a fiery and devoted officer who had been my second in command and advocate in Rome. Their reports confirmed what I had feared. Pompey was gathering legions, and the city was bracing for conflict. The die was nearly cast, even before I had made any irrevocable move. On an anxious evening, I gathered my most trusted centurions and officers in a council. A candle flickered on the table between us, illuminating the warm, determined faces of men who had shared countless campaigns with me. I informed them plainly of the Senate's decree and Pompey's preparations. Then I spoke the thoughts weighing on my heart. If we yield, I said quietly, we are lost. I will be prosecuted and exiled. Many of you may suffer as well. If we stand and fight, we fight against Romans, against men we once called friends. A heavy silence followed. Then one veteran centurion, his face scarred from a dozen battles, struck his fist to his chest and said, General, we will follow you, whatever you decide. We trust in you. Around the circle, heads nodded. Their loyalty and confidence washed over me like a tide. In that moment, a certain calm resolve crystallized within. Events had left me no good choices, only a choice of necessary evils. I knew what I would do. When the council dispersed, I stepped outside. The night sky over Ravenna was clear, and the stars glinted like distant shield bosses. The road southward vanished into darkness beyond our campfires. Somewhere down that road lay a small river called the Rubicon, the official border of my province. To cross it in arms would be treason, an irrevocable step. I breathed in the cold air and closed my eyes. In my mind I saw the faces of my family, my mother Aurelia, my late father, my dear Julia, and the faces of Romans rich and poor whose lives had intertwined with mine. I felt as though I stood on a precipice, history itself waiting with bated breath. Perhaps the gods had always led me to this brink. With a steady exhale, I made my decision. Come what may, I would defend my dignity, my friends, and the cause I believed just. If it meant civil war, then I would strive to make it swift and as merciful as possible, and to build a better peace thereafter. But I would not creep into political oblivion and allow the Republic to be monopolized by those who had shown such little faith in me or the people. In the stillness of that night I felt strangely at peace. The die was cast indeed, at least in my mind, if not yet on the ground. I whispered a final prayer to Fortuna, goddess of fortune. Guide me, as you have through many trials, and forgive me for what I must do. Then I turned and walked back into the warmth of the lamplight, resolved to meet my fate with courage. Part 6. Caesar and Pompey. Crossing the Rubicon set a great wheel in motion. In a matter of weeks in 49 BC, the Roman world was split between those loyal to me and those loyal to Pompey and the Senate's decree. War, however reluctant, had come. Yet I was determined that this civil war would not mirror the bloody prescriptions of Sulla's time. I sought a swift campaign, minimal bloodshed, and clemency wherever possible. Marching down from the north of Italy, I encountered surprisingly little resistance. Town after town opened their gates to my legions. Many soldiers in Pompey's forces melting away, rather than fight against fellow Romans. Pompey himself, caught off guard by my rapid advance, abandoned the capital. Along with a mass of senators and aristocrats, he fled across the Adriatic Sea to Greece to regroup. From the north of Italy, I marched swiftly south. City after city opened its gates rather than resist. Pompey, caught off guard, evacuated Rome with his supporters and sailed across the Adriatic to Greece to regroup. In a matter of weeks, I secured the Italian peninsula without significant bloodshed. Upon entering Rome, I assured the populace of safety and proclaimed that there would be no Sullan-style prescriptions. But I did not tarry long in the capital. Pompey was assembling a formidable force abroad, and I needed to move decisively. Before chasing Pompey directly, I turned west to neutralize his forces in Spain, which threatened my rear. Crossing the Alps with speed, I confronted Pompey's legates on the Spanish plains. After some maneuvering and hardship, including floods and supply strains, I compelled their surrender at Ilerda. In victory, I showed clemency. I integrated the defeated soldiers into my own ranks or let them return home. Roman blood, I believed, need not be spilled if loyalty could be won by mercy. With Spain pacified and my rear secure, I hurried back eastward to face Pompey himself at last. Pompey commanded the loyalty of many of Rome's eastern provinces and legions. Before confronting him directly, I decided to neutralize his forces in Hispania, Spain, which threatened my rear. It was a risky gamble to leave Italy and Rome while Pompey loomed abroad, but I trusted the swiftness of action. As I marched my troops on the long road to Spain, I mused on an old strategy. Attack a general without an army before an army without a general. Pompey himself was far away, so in Spain I faced his lieutenants. The summer sun beat down on our helmets as we maneuvered across dry Spanish plains. At Ilerda, after some difficult skirmishes and even setbacks due to floods and supply issues, we managed to surround and force the surrender of Pompey's legions stationed there. I was generous in victory. The defeated soldiers were not massacred or enslaved, but incorporated into my ranks or allowed to go home. I knew that healing would be needed when this war was over, and killing Romans only to assert power was not my desire. The men who had fought against me in Spain saw my leniency, and many swore new oaths of loyalty. By the autumn of 49 BC, the western half of the empire was securely under my control. Having secured my flank, I returned east to face Pompey himself. Winter was spent making preparations, gathering ships, ensuring the loyalty of Italy, and maintaining calm in Rome through appointed allies. Early in 48 BC, I crossed the Adriatic with as many legions as the limited transports could carry, landing in Epirus, northwestern Greece. It was strange to think Pompey and I, who once dined together, shared family ties, and governed side by side, were now adversaries maneuvering our armies on foreign soil. He had mustered a grand force in Greece, perhaps 40 to 50,000 legionaries, including many senators' sons and Roman nobles, plus cavalry from allied eastern kings. I had fewer men at my immediate disposal, as some of my legions were delayed crossing the sea, but my troops were veterans of the Gallic Wars, fiercely devoted and battle-hardened. The stage was set for a confrontation that all knew would decide the Republic's future. Our first significant clash occurred near the town of Dyrrhachium on the Illyrian coast. Pompey held strong defensive positions there, and I rashly attempted to hem him in with earthworks, much as I had done at Alesia. It was one of the few times my boldness nearly cost me dearly. In a sudden counter-assault, Pompey's forces punched through my lines. Panic spread momentarily among some of my troops at the unexpected ferocity and the sight of their comrades being overrun. I galloped into the fray, rallying the cohorts, and managed to conduct an orderly retreat to avoid complete disaster. We had to abandon the siege. As we fell back under the hot sun, I could see Pompey's legions standing proud on the ramparts we had built, now turned to their advantage. He chose not to pursue aggressively, a decision that saved me. Later, in calmer moments, I reflected that had Pompey pressed his advantage at Dyrrhachium, he might have ended the war that day. Today the victory was the enemy's, had there been anyone to claim it, I supposedly told my aides. Pompey's caution, born perhaps of memories of my past unpredictability, gave us another chance. I did not dwell on the setback. Instead, I led my army inland toward the plains of Thessaly, regrouping and scouting for a favorable ground to fight. Pompey, buoyed by his success and prodded by senators in his camp to finish me off, followed. We both knew the decisive encounter was approaching. We found it near a small river named the Enipius. by a place called Pharsalus? It was there, on a clear morning in August 48 BC, that Pompey and I drew up our legions, facing one another for the final test. Pompey's army stretched wide across the plain, their ranks bristling with spears and their banners fluttering in the breeze. They outnumbered us significantly. He positioned a massive contingent of cavalry on his left flank, aiming to sweep around and crush my right and rear, a classic tactic given his superiority in horsemen. I understood his plan and prepared a surprise of my own. I quietly arranged a hidden reserve of my best infantry, a few cohorts, behind my own small cavalry wing, instructing them on how to react when Pompey's horse charged. The rest of my army, though outnumbered, I formed in the traditional 3 lines, with myself commanding the center as always. Before the battle, I addressed my men with calm confidence. These veterans of Gaul knew me, and I knew them. No elaborate speech was needed. I simply reminded them that we fought not to impose tyranny, but to restore true liberty to Rome from those who abused it. I promised them that this would be the final battle, and that victory would mean peace and an end to the strife. The Battle of Pharsalus began with shouts and the crash of shields. Pompey's legions held their ground initially, expecting our charge. Instead, my front line advanced at a measured pace to avoid tiring, then threw their pila, javelins, with deadly accuracy before closing. Soon the plain was engulfed in the din of combat. Across the field I saw Pompey's mighty cavalry force gallop forward, dust billowing beneath hundreds of hooves. They smashed into my far right flank, easily scattering my outnumbered horsemen there. Then, as Pompey's cavalry began to wheel inward to take my legions in the side, I gave the signal. My hidden infantry reserve sprang out from behind a low rise and hurled their spears straight into the surprised cavalry at close range. The effect was devastating. Horses reeled, riders fell, and the proud charge of Pompey's flank was suddenly a confused mass of wounded men and animals. My reserve cohorts then rushed at them with swords. The once dominant cavalry of Pompey broke and fled off the field entirely. With Pompey's flanking maneuver foiled, I pressed the advantage. I ordered a general advance. My legionaries in the center, shouting encouragement to one another, pushed hard against Pompey's now undermined line. Slowly, inch by bloody inch, we began to gain ground. I vividly recall catching sight of Pompey's face across the battlefield in that moment. He stood on a small hill surrounded by his officers. What was going through his mind, I wonder? A lifetime of glory and ambition teetering in the balance. When my men finally punched a gap through his center, the pressure was too much for his fresh, yet less experienced, legions. They began to waver and fall back. First a cohort, then a full legion turned in flight. A cheer went up from our side, a sound of triumph mixed with disbelief. Pompey's great army was collapsing. Soon it became a rout. Thousands of Pompey's troops threw down their arms and ran toward the hills or back to their camp. My soldiers, flushed with victory and vengeance for the losses we had suffered, pursued fiercely. In that moment, witnessing the slaughter that threatened to ensue, I felt a profound urge to show mercy. "Spare your fellow Romans?" I cried out, riding among the ranks to curb the bloodlust. "The victory is ours, enough killing." Many heard me and held back, though not all. The battle ended with total victory for us, and the battlefield was littered with the fallen. I took no joy in seeing so many Roman dead, even though they had opposed me. They were sons of our common republic. Each lost a wound to Rome herself. Back in Pompey's abandoned camp, I found tents laid out as if for a grand senatorial feast, tables still laden with half-finished meals and fine wine. So certain had they been of victory that they were preparing celebrations. The scene filled me with a kind of melancholy. In one of those tents, I sat down on a camp stool amid the silence, removed my helmet, and for a brief moment buried my face in my hands. So much struggle, all coming to this. When I emerged, I resolved to act with clemency and dignity. I issued orders that all Roman citizens who surrendered were to be spared. And indeed, many high-ranking captives were brought to me, men who had vilified me in the Senate only months before. To each I extended my hand and words of pardon. Some wept with relief and gratitude. Others could scarcely meet my eyes out of shame. But I meant what I said. The Civil War was effectively over, and I wanted the healing to begin at once. Perhaps the hardest to confront was Marcus Brutus, son of my former love Servilia. He had fought on Pompey's side despite our closeness. As he knelt, I raised him up and embraced him as a father would a son. "Forget the past," I told Brutus softly. "Henceforth we shall work together for Rome." He was overcome and vowed his loyalty anew. I believed him. In that moment I was simply thankful he was alive and unharmed. Pompey himself was nowhere to be found. He had fled the field early once the outcome was beyond doubt, riding hard to the coast. Within days we learned he had sailed to Egypt, seeking refuge with the boy king Ptolemy XIII, who had been an ally to Rome. I could not allow my old friend and rival to escape. Also, I felt a lingering affection and concern for him despite all that had transpired. I set off across the sea in pursuit, taking a small force and leaving the bulk of my army to follow later. When my ship reached the Egyptian port city of Alexandria, I sent word requesting an audience with King Ptolemy. I hoped to perhaps reconcile with Pompey, or at least negotiate his peaceful surrender. What happened next will forever haunt me. Egyptian courtiers approached my delegation, not with Pompey in tow, but with a wicker basket. Inside, wrapped in a cloak and soaked in brine, was the severed head of Pompey Magnus. The king's advisors, thinking to please me, had treacherously murdered Pompey upon his arrival. He was stabbed to death on a small boat in sight of the shore by men pretending to welcome him. They presented his head to me as though it were some prize. I was utterly appalled. This was not my wish, not my way. Pompey had been a great man, a consul of Rome, and the husband of my dear Julia. To see him end in such a dishonorable manner, butchered by foreigners and his body desecrated, cut me to the core. I looked away in disgust and grief. Tears blurred my vision, unexpected and hot. Those present later recounted that I wept openly. I do not remember, but it is likely true. I ordered Pompey's head to be taken and given proper rites and burial. As for Ptolemy's advisors who committed this vile act, I concealed my rage for the moment, but I swore that such cruelty and arrogance would be repaid. That evening, I stood on the shore of Egypt, gazing out at the Mediterranean as dusk fell. Gentle waves lapped at the harbor stones, oblivious to the human tragedies they bore witness to. Pompey was gone, the last check on my power, but also a man who had once been my ally and friend. The Civil War, for all intents and purposes, was over. I was the sole master of the Roman world. Yet instead of triumph, I felt a profound sadness and weariness wash over me. War is a cruel redeemer. It resolves political impasses, but at terrible human cost. I thought of Pompey as he was in younger days, vigorous, proud, winning victories in far lands, celebrated as the Great, and I thought of how fate had finally reduced him to a lifeless object of pity in a basket. Is this what we have come to? I whispered to the empty air. There on that Alexandrian shore, I made an offering for Pompey's soul, according to our Roman rites. As the flames of the makeshift pyre flickered and sent smoke toward the stars, I silently vowed to carry his memory with honor. He had fallen not by my hand, but I would ensure he was remembered not for his flight, but for his many contributions to Rome. Civil war had devoured one of Rome's brightest stars, and I was determined that no more needless deaths should stain our future if I could help it. With that somber promise, I turned my mind to the tasks ahead. Dawn was breaking over the east, a new day for Rome and for me. I resolved that moving forward, I would strive to secure a peace and a governance worthy of the sacrifices made. Little did I realize that even in Egypt, new challenges were already gathering here in Egypt, and my journey was far from complete. Part 7. The Queen of the Nile and the World. I soon discovered that ending one war meant stepping into another storm. Cleopatra, the young queen of Egypt, entered my life as unexpectedly as a desert wind. In the days following Pompey's death, as I remained in Alexandria to sort out Egypt's tangled politics, the rivalry between the royal siblings Ptolemy XIII and Cleopatra VII was at its peak. One evening in the palace, Cleopatra had herself smuggled into my quarters rolled in a carpet. As it unfurled, she emerged like Athena from a cloak, poised, intelligent, and intent on winning my favor. I was charmed by her bold entrance and quick wit. She argued for her rightful throne and sought my support against her brother Ptolemy. Thus began our alliance, and a romance that caught me completely by surprise. Before long, I found myself drawn into Egypt's dynastic struggle on Cleopatra's behalf. Ptolemy's forces turned against us, and my small Roman garrison in Alexandria was besieged. Fierce street fighting and palace defenses occupied the ensuing months. Amid burning warehouses and skirmishes near the great library, we fought desperately to maintain our foothold. Through it all, Cleopatra remained by my side, steady and shrewd, guiding me through the labyrinth of Egyptian politics, even as war raged around us. In a decisive battle on the Nile Delta in early 47 BC, we defeated Ptolemy's army. Ptolemy himself perished, reportedly drowning in the Nile's rush as he tried to flee. With that victory, Cleopatra's throne was secure. She became sole ruler of Egypt, co-ruling nominally with another younger brother, but in truth she held the reins. In the aftermath, I allowed myself a brief respite from the whirlwind of war. Cleopatra and I took a leisurely voyage up the Nile on a splendid barge, a dreamlike interlude I cherish even now. Reclining under silken canopies, we drifted past palms, golden dunes, and ancient temples. By daylight, we marveled at pyramids and statues of long-dead pharaohs. By dusk, we listened to the night birds and watched the river reflect the stars. Cleopatra would tell me stories of Egypt's gods and kings in her soothing, melodic voice. I was a seasoned conqueror, but as I sailed with her through that timeless landscape, I felt a youthful wonder again. Our bond deepened. With Cleopatra, I experienced a tender, private happiness I had not known in years. She even claimed ancestry from Alexander the Great and talked of visions of a united world, perhaps ruled jointly by a Roman and an Egyptian monarch. I do not know if I ever seriously entertained such notions, but in those languid moments on the Nile, anything felt possible. By the time I departed Alexandria, Cleopatra was with child, a son she would later name Ptolemy Caesar, known to many as Caesarion. Though Roman custom prevented me from making him an heir in Rome, I quietly acknowledged him as mine. Leaving Cleopatra and our infant boy in Egypt was bittersweet. I promised I would see them again, I arranged for Cleopatra's continued rule and protection, leaving several legions to support her position. But urgent news from afar soon demanded my attention. Trouble was brewing in Asia Minor. Pharnacus, a son of my old nemesis, King Mithridates of Pontus, had taken advantage of Roman distraction to rebel and seize territories on the Black Sea's southern shore. Despite being weary from continuous campaigning, I marched out to face this new challenge as soon as I returned to Asia Minor in mid-47 BC. The conflict was resolved faster than anyone imagined. Outside a town called Zela, I confronted Pharnacus. In a swift, decisive battle, my legions routed his forces utterly. The entire affair scarcely took any effort at all compared to what I had endured in Gaul and the Civil War. In a rare moment of light-hearted triumph, I dictated a report to the Senate in Rome with only 3 Latin words: Veni, Vidi, Vici. I came, I saw, I conquered. Word of that brash phrase spread quickly and became legendary. Truthfully, after so many arduous trials, there was something grimly satisfying in such an easy win. I returned to Rome in 46 BC at last, having been away on campaigns for the better part of 6 years. I found a city much changed and changing still. The Civil War was not completely over when I arrived. A large faction of Pompeian loyalists had regrouped in North Africa under Cato and Metellus Scipio. They refused every olive branch I extended. Reluctantly, I prepared for yet another campaign to finally secure peace. That spring I sailed for Africa. On the plains of Thapsus, near the sun-baked coast of what is now Tunisia, I fought the last forces of the old Senate Guard. My legions, seasoned and confident, shattered the enemy ranks in a sharp battle. King Juba of Numidia, who supported them, was defeated as well. In the aftermath, many enemy nobles, including Metellus Scipio, perished by their own hand or in flight. The most renowned among them was Marcus Cato, Cato the Younger, who had been the moral backbone of the Republican resistance. Trapped in Utica and unwilling to accept pardon, Cato chose suicide, preferring death to what he perceived as living under my rule. When I received word of Cato's end, I was profoundly saddened. I respected his principled character, even though we had been bitter adversaries. "Cato, I grudge you your death," I whispered, meaning I had wanted to offer him mercy and friendship, but he denied me the chance. His stoic end affected me more than I let on. It felt as if the old republic itself, stubborn, unyielding, honorable in its way, had died with him. Victory in Africa earned me another title, Imperator many times over. Upon returning to Rome, I celebrated a series of grand triumphs, albeit with some hesitation. I staged games and parades not only for my foreign conquests of Gaul, Egypt, Pontus, and Numidia, but also, delicately, to mark the end of civil strife. In one procession, the effigy of the Nile god flowed with water through the streets. In another, I rode in a gilded chariot with the name of Veni Vidi Vici emblazoned on a banner, eliciting roars of approval. I tried to omit any overt suggestion that Pompey or fellow Romans were being triumphed over. These celebrations were, in my mind, for restoring peace and honoring Rome's expansion. Still, a few found the spectacle in poor taste, given that our civil conflicts were so fresh. I understood their feelings. Indeed, as I climbed the Capitol to offer thanks to Jupiter, I silently thanked also the Roman soldiers on both sides who had shed blood in these wars, and I resolved to govern in a way that justified their sacrifices. At last, in late 46 BC and into 45 BC, I could turn my energies to healing and reforming our battered republic. The Senate, in gratitude or perhaps in flattery, showered me with unprecedented honors, naming me dictator for life, father of the fatherland, and decreeing statues and celebrations in my name. I accepted these tokens with a public show of humility, keenly aware of Rome's loathing for kings. Each time the notion of a crown surfaced, I made a point to refuse it. All my power, I insisted, was for the good of the Republic. I enacted wide-reaching reforms, enlarging the Senate to make it more representative, founding new colonies for veterans and the poor, reforming taxes and debts, and commissioning grand projects to beautify Rome. One of my dearest innovations was a new calendar, aligning our months with the sun, a reform to stand the test of time. In the midst of all this, Cleopatra came to Rome in 46 BC, bringing our infant son. I settled her in a comfortable villa across the Tiber. Her presence scandalized some. A foreign queen in Rome was bound to spark gossip, but I ensured she was treated with the respect due a monarch and guest. Calpurnia remained my steady companion in Roman society, gentle, perceptive, and supportive. If she resented anything, she rarely showed it openly. Her loyalty was unwavering, and for that I was grateful. By early 45 BC, after a final brief campaign in Hispania, where Pompey's remaining son, Gnaeus, raised a futile revolt and was defeated at Munda, every corner of the Roman world was under my authority. I returned to Italy as the unrivaled leader of the Republic. I was nearly 55 years old. My hair was going thin and gray at the temples. Lines of care etched my forehead. And yet I felt invigorated at the very summit of life's possibilities. I had achieved more than I ever dreamed as that ambitious boy reading tales of heroes by candlelight. Standing on my balcony on the Palatine Hill at sunset, I could gaze over the city of Rome humming with activity, the marble temples gilded by the last light, the forum teeming with senators and citizens busy building a new future. I allowed myself the thought that this, indeed, was the pinnacle of fortune's favors. Still, beneath the triumphs and reforms, subtle shadows lengthened. I was not oblivious to murmurs among some senators. They resented the concentration of power in my hands and the diminishing of their own prestige. Old defenders of the Republic's strict traditions, who had survived the wars or returned from exile, looked at me with unease. My title of dictator for life, though intended to stabilize governance, reminded them uncomfortably of a monarch's permanence. Once, at the Lupercalia festival in February 44 BC, Mark Antony theatrically offered me a laurel crown in front of a crowd, a gesture perhaps meant to gauge public sentiment. I refused it not once, but thrice, each time more firmly, while the crowd applauded my humility. Yet I noted a mixture of relief and cynicism in the faces of the senators watching. They could not be sure whether I truly meant to renounce all regal ambition, or if I secretly desired kingship. In truth, I had no love for the word king. It was anathema to any Roman. My aim was to be a benevolent guardian of Rome, a restorer of order and builder of the state. But I understood why the cautious and the proud might still fear that I intended to crown myself. As winter of 44 BC waned, I sensed both great optimism and quiet unrest in the air. I had announced plans for further grand projects, including a campaign to avenge Crassus by conquering Parthia in the east, and massive public works like draining marshes and erecting libraries. To many, I was a visionary reformer ushering in a golden age. To others, I had become a single point of failure for the Republic, a potential tyrant to be removed for the old freedoms to survive. Surrounded by accolades and monumental tasks, I often paused to listen to my own heart. Did I feel secure? Did I feel at peace? In some respects, yes, I was content that I had ended the bloodshed and begun to rejuvenate Rome, but I also felt, at times, a vague sense of foreboding, like the heaviness in the air before a summer tempest. Calpurnia, ever intuitive, once confided that she worried the gods might envy my good fortune, that so much success might attract ill omen. I smiled and dismissed her concern, reassuring her that the gods favored our endeavors. Yet at night, as I drifted into rare and brief sleep, I sometimes saw images of my own statue bleeding, or of a great clock unwinding. Perhaps it was nothing more than the echo of countless dangers faced and barely escaped. Or perhaps destiny was whispering a final warning to its favored son. Whatever the case, I pressed on fearlessly. I had lived my life following the guiding star of my convictions, and I would not falter now. In public, I continued to display confidence and magnanimity, attending the Senate, speaking kindly even to those who opposed me, and engaging with ordinary citizens whenever I could. I wanted no one to doubt that I saw myself as the people's servant, not their master. As I went about these duties in the late winter days of 44 BC, I felt we stood on the threshold of a new era, bright with promise. The last remnants of civil war had been swept away. Rome was stronger, more expansive, and more unified than ever. I dared to hope that we had escaped the cycle of violence, that my rule would herald peace and prosperity for generations to come. Little did I suspect how quickly fortune, which had raised me so high, was preparing to turn her wheel once more. Part 8. The Ides of March. For all the portents and whispers, the Ides of March 44 BC dawned much like any other day. A pale spring sun crept over Rome, illuminating the forum and the temples where I had walked so often. I awoke in my home on the Palatine feeling slightly unwell and oddly restless. Calpurnia had spent a fitful night beside me. She suffered disturbing dreams of my statue bleeding and of me collapsing in her arms. In the gray pre-dawn, she begged me with tears to stay home that day, to postpone the Senate meeting. "Please, for my sake," she implored softly, her hand cool on mine. This was unlike her, normally so calm and practical. Her evident dread touched me. I kissed her forehead and considered yielding to her plea, just to ease her mind. That morning, a number of unusual events gave even me pause. My physician advised rest for my ill health. A soothsayer who had once warned, "Beware the Ides of March," was seen waiting along the route to the theater of Pompey, where the Senate session was to be held, the curia being renovated. My servants whispered that the sacrificial omens were unfavorable. The entrails of the morning's offering showed abnormalities. All signs seemed to counsel caution. For a brief moment, as I donned my senatorial toga, I felt a heavy hesitation. Perhaps I should heed these warnings, I thought. After all, what would one missed Senate meeting matter? Yet I had always prided myself on my rational mind and my courage. Was I, Julius Caesar, to be swayed by dreams and omens? Moreover, a number of important matters awaited at the Senate: petitions from veterans, plans for our Parthian campaign. I shook off the dark feeling. Decimus Brutus, one of my trusted companions, and unbeknownst to me, one of the conspirators, arrived at my house mid-morning to escort me. He played his part skillfully. When I mentioned Calpurnia's fears and my inclination to stay home, Decimus gently chided me. "Caesar, will the Senate and people not gossip if you, their bold leader, cower over a woman's dream? Come, we have honors to vote you today." I frowned, half annoyed and half persuaded. He was right that I had never let superstition rule me before. Concern for reputation, and perhaps a touch of pride, ultimately tipped the scales. I decided to go. We set out a little late. As I descended the Palatine Hill, the city bustled as usual. People smiled and waved, tradesmen, children, clients hoping for favors. I returned their greetings, trying to shake off the morning's disquiet. Along the route, the soothsayer I'd been warned of caught my eye in the crowd. I paused and called out in a jocular tone, "Well, the Ides of March have come." He responded evenly, "I, Caesar, but not gone." I smiled at what I took as theatrical flair and moved on. At the theater of Pompey, senators milled about under the portico's shade, waiting for the session to begin. Many were men I considered friends. Some had fought at my side in past wars, others I had recently pardoned after Pharsalus. I noticed Cassius and Marcus Brutus among them. I greeted Brutus warmly with a clasp of the hand. He appeared nervous and avoided my eyes. I assumed he felt guilty for having opposed me in the Civil War. I murmured that I was glad he was there, that we would do great things for Rome together. He gave a weak smile. If only I had probed a bit more in that moment. But I did not. The senators took their seats in the curved stone auditorium repurposed as a meeting hall. I, as dictator, sat in a gilded chair at the front. The air was stuffy and motes of dust drifted in the slanted sunlight. We began routine business, a petition here, a decree there. Suddenly, within moments, the mood shifted. One senator, later I recalled it was Tullius Caesar, approached me with an urgent plea regarding his exiled brother. As he spoke, others crowded nearer. They seemed to converge by design, but in the moment I only frowned at the breach of decorum. Caesar grew increasingly agitated, tugging at my toga as if begging harder. "This is not the proper time for that," I began to scold, irritated by his grasp. Then it happened, swift and all at once, like wolves springing upon unsuspecting prey. I felt a sharp pain sear into my neck just below the throat. Caesar had drawn a dagger and struck. I raised my hand to fend him off, utterly shocked. "Why, this is violence," I cried, or something to that effect. For a heartbeat, I believed it might be a horrible joke or misunderstanding. But then another blow, a knife sliced into my side. I gasped. The auditorium erupted into chaos. Benches scraped and men shouted. I staggered to my feet, only to see more blades flashing in the air. Cassius lunged forward and slashed my face. I felt warm blood trickle down my cheek. Incredulous and suddenly enraged, I tried to fight back. I grabbed Cassius's arm, but another strike to my ribs weakened my grip. I remember the frenzy of that moment in disjointed glimpses. My attackers' faces twisted with a mix of fury and fear. The thud of my sandals stumbling over the steps. The roar of blood in my ears drowning out the screams around me. Someone stabbed me from behind. Later, I'd learn even my old comrade Decimus delivered a wound. Blinded by pain, I spun around, seeking any escape or aid. It was then I saw Marcus Brutus, dear Brutus, whom I loved almost as a son, step forward, dagger in hand. His eyes met mine for an eternal second. In them I saw anguish and resolve. "You too, my child?" I managed to whisper, barely audible, in Greek. "Kai su, tenin?" I do not know if he answered. Brutus thrust his blade into my lower abdomen, and with that blow, something in me gave up. I ceased resisting. Reeling from over 20 stab wounds, I drew my toga over my head with my left hand. Whether to shield my dignity in death or simply out of instinct, I am not sure. The strength left my legs. I swayed, then sank to the marble floor beside the pedestal of Pompey's statue. The irony that here I bled at the feet of Pompey did not escape me even in those fading moments of consciousness. The hall echoed with panicked screams as senators and onlookers fled. My assassins, their deed done, backed away from my fallen form. In the sudden stillness, I found myself lying on the cool stone, my blood pooling around me in a dark, widening circle. A strange lassitude overtook me. The pain ebbed into a distant throb, as if my body, recognizing death's approach, granted me a final mercy of numbness. My vision began to blur. Through the fabric of my half-drawn toga, I glimpsed the dome of the ceiling and the limbs of Pompey's statue above. Dust motes swirled in a sunbeam overhead, serene and golden. How quietly the world continued, I thought, even as my world was ending. I felt a warmth on my cheek, perhaps the trickle of blood, perhaps a tear. Brutus and the others were gone. I was surrounded only by a few terrified witnesses and the sprawling emptiness of the chamber. A tingling cold crept up my limbs. My arms fell limp at my sides. Thoughts came to me oddly clear and calm. I remembered, in a rush, the little boy I was long ago, playing in the Subura's streets, dreaming of greatness. I remembered standing on the banks of the Rubicon, the chill of the water on my horse's legs. I remembered Cleopatra's laughter under the Egyptian stars, the weight of my newborn son in my arms, the cheers of my soldiers calling me Imperator. How full and extraordinary a life I had lived. Who could have imagined, when I first set out in my youth, that it would come to this end, betrayed by those I counted as friends, dying in the house of my former rival Pompey. And yet, strangely, I found no anger in my heart in that final moment. Only a profound sorrow and a profound peace mingled together. My breath grew shallow. The edges of my sight darkened. Somewhere far off I thought I heard Calpurnia calling my name, or perhaps it was only the echo in my mind. I wanted to tell her I was sorry for not heeding her warning and that I loved her. I tried to form words, but tasted only the metallic warmth of blood. A crimson veil seemed to descend over the world. The muffled sounds of chaos faded to a soft hush, like the sea's distant whisper. My final gaze drifted upward to the statue of Pompey above me. It seemed to look down with a solemn marble sympathy. In that last flicker of awareness, I felt as though Pompey's spirit and all the shades of those I had known were gathering to accompany me on this next journey. The light grew blinding, then dim. A final thought crossed my mind like a falling star. Have I done well by Rome? I hoped with all my being that the answer would be yes, that my life, with all its triumphs and mistakes, had in the end helped the republic I loved. As my eyes closed, I offered one last silent prayer to Venus Genetrix, my divine ancestress, to watch over the city and people of Rome, and then, with a gentle exhale, I let go. Julius Caesar, servant of Rome, slipped into the darkness, into history, as the world continued its inexorable turn under the same sun that was now setting on the Ides of March. Part 9. The Legacy and Dawn. I did not feel the moment when my soul departed my body on that fateful Ides of March. One instant I was fading into darkness on the Senate floor. The next I seemed to drift free, unbound by pain or the weight of mortal life. It was as if I were a bird rising above the forum's rooftops, seeing the world for the first time in its entirety. Below, Romans ran in panic and confusion at the news of my assassination. I wanted to call out to them, to comfort those who grieved, to calm those who feared for the Republic's future. But I could no longer be heard. I was everywhere and nowhere, an unseen witness to the unfolding of events I had set in motion long ago. In the days that followed my death, Rome convulsed with uncertainty. My body lay on a golden bier in the forum during my funeral, and throngs of citizens gathered, wailing with genuine sorrow. Mark Antony, my faithful lieutenant, delivered a powerful oration over my corpse, showing the crowd my blood-stained toga and each stab wound, naming the traitors. The people's grief turned to fury. A great cry went up, and they seized torches to burn the houses of Brutus, Cassius, and the other conspirators who fled for their lives. I watched as flames licked at the corners of the forum, astonished by the depth of the public's love. In that moment I understood that I truly had become something larger than myself in their eyes, the embodiment of their hopes for stability and prosperity. The chaos gave rise to a new civil war. Alas, my death did not bring back the old republic, as the conspirators had naively hoped. Instead, it ushered in another round of conflict. From my strange new vantage, I followed the fates of those who took up my mantle. Octavian, my grand-nephew and posthumously adopted son, arrived on the scene. A young man of just 18 years, yet shrewd beyond his years. With cool resolve, he joined forces with Mark Antony and Lepidus to form a second triumvirate, avenging my murder and defeating Brutus and Cassius at the Battle of Philippi. I felt no triumph in seeing Brutus fall on his sword, only sadness that it had come to that. Yet I welcomed the end of the conspirators' misguided cause. Octavian, whom I had raised in my sister's household, grew into a leader more formidable than anyone imagined. In time, he and Antony turned on each other, and Octavian, brilliant, patient, ruthless when necessary, emerged as the sole master of the Roman world, much as I had been. In 27 BC, the Senate granted him the title Augustus. The Republic quietly morphed into an empire under his guidance, and Augustus would rule wisely for decades. In watching his rise, I felt a swelling of pride. He was the heir I had groomed unknowingly, and he fulfilled many of the dreams I had nurtured for Rome: a strong government, extended peace, the Pax Romana, and prosperity that reached even the provinces I once conquered. If it cost the old republican framework to achieve it, perhaps that was a necessary evolution. How strange the workings of fate! The men who struck me down claimed to defend the republic's freedom, yet in the vacuum of my death, their beloved republic perished anyway. Reborn as something new, helmeted by one man with supreme authority. In truth, that had been taking shape even in my lifetime, for better or worse. I like to think that by eliminating me, the conspirators only hastened the inevitable. I bear them no malice now. From this higher perspective, I understand each acted according to his conscience, flawed though their reasoning was. I hope history remembers Brutus and Cassius not only as assassins but as men who loved Rome in their own misguided way. As for me, I suspect history's judgment will be mixed. Some will call me a tyrant who destroyed the Republic. Others will call me a visionary who paved the way for a grand empire. Both contain grains of truth. I have watched countless generations study my life, its triumphs and tragedies, drawing lessons as they will. My name, Caesar, became a title worn by emperors for centuries beyond my time, not just in Rome but even in far-off lands, in Germanic tongues and Slavic. Kaiser and Tsar echo my name. Perhaps this is one form of immortality the fates granted me. How many men can say their name became synonymous with rulership itself? And yet, that legacy is not one I could have imagined or sought. In life, I cared less for titles than for the tangible betterment of our state and people. I find solace in knowing that much of what I built endured. The Julian calendar I introduced regulated time for millennia. The colonies I founded became thriving cities. The Forum Julium I constructed in Rome stood as a graceful reminder of my dedication to the Roman public. Even the month of Quintilis was renamed July in my honor, so that every summer my memory quietly returns with the turning of the year. And though the Senate that betrayed me never officially restored the Republic as they dreamed, that same Senate, perhaps out of remorse or political calculation, saw fit to formally deify me a few years after my death. They proclaimed me Divus Iulius, the divine Julius. How curious that the very body which had harbored my killers also placed a star crown upon my memory. But I do not dwell on divine honors. What matters more is that the Romans I loved continued to thrive in the empire that followed. On the third day of my funeral games, a great comet appeared in the night sky over Rome, a bright-tailed star that hung for 7 days. People marveled and said it was the soul of Julius Caesar, taking its place among the gods. I can neither confirm nor deny that poetic notion, but I will say that as I drift now in whatever realm lies beyond life, I often imagine myself in the form of a star. Perhaps I inhabit that comet's fiery heart, gazing down across the velvet darkness at the world of mortals below. I see Rome in all her ages, the city of brick that I left becoming a city of marble under Augustus, the centuries of glory and struggle, the eternal spirit of the Roman people, shining on long after all of us who played our parts have gone. If I could speak to those who came after me, I would tell them that all I did with Rome's welfare in mind. Though I was not infallible, and errors were made, my love for Rome never wavered. I would urge them to learn from my life, to be bold but also merciful, to embrace change but cherish tradition, to seize greatness yet remain humble before the gods and posterity. For power and life itself are fleeting gifts. No man, however illustrious, escapes mortality or the judgment of time. And what of Julius Caesar now? I have become in death what I could never be in life, a symbol, an idea, in some eyes a cautionary tale, in others an inspiration. Perhaps I am now more myth than man. I am content with that. My mortal journey, with all its blazing victories and dark betrayals, has long since ended. But the current of history into which I plunged flows onward, and I am part of it forever. In the quiet of eternity, I find peace watching the Rome I nurtured continue to evolve. My legacy lives not only in stone busts or the pages of scholars, but in every corner of the world that still feels the imprint of Roman law, language, and culture. An empire of the mind that outlasted the physical one. From this tranquil vantage beyond the living world, I let go of regret and longing. I feel immense gratitude for the chance to have lived so richly and to have played my role in Rome's story. The pain of my end has long faded, and in its place remains the love I have always held for my city and its people. Even now, when I sense the bustle of Rome or what Rome has become through the ages, I send forth a silent blessing that the virtues of our republic, courage, duty, and honor, endure in the hearts of humanity. Look up, if you will, on a clear night. You may find a particularly bright star lingering just above the horizon. Romans of old called it Caesar's comet. When I see its light shimmering over the rooftops and rivers of the world, I like to imagine that it is my spirit keeping gentle watch. And as long as that star shines and stories of my life are told, I know that I will not truly be forgotten. In that thought lies a deep and comforting peace. I began this narration in the first glow of a Roman dawn, and now I end it beneath an endless night sky. My journey from the Subura's narrow lanes to the Rubicon's brink, from the sands of Gaul to the marble of the Forum, has reached its close. I have crossed many rivers and frontiers in my time, and now at last I cross into the gentle realm of memory. My voice falls silent, but the echo of my footsteps endures in the annals of history. Farewell, traveler. May the lessons of my life and the spirit of room which I cherished light your path through the darkest of nights, as surely as the stars shine eternal overhead.